While time seemed to stand still, the only thing that appeared to move was the angel statue way out in the sea of dead grass. I tried to keep busy, to find some meaning in this barren void. My attempts went unnoticed. I hesitated, straying too far from the hut, fearing it may disappear just as quick as it appeared once before when I first discovered it. Yet, the longer I was there, the closer the statue came. I felt no hunger, no thirst, no desire to sleep. Within this void, time seemed warped. What scared me most of all was the sun was not even hot, despite it shining bright high up in the sky, without a cloud to be seen. Everything seemed neutral here. While I typed my story up to this point, I searched the web and watched countless hours of videos. Over the day, my eyes began to strain. My camera reflection painted a horrible picture of myself. I looked as if I aged 10 years, with big dark bags under my eyes. My mind raced back to my earliest encounters with Robert, the previous day shift worker who always looked perpetually tired, ghoul-like. While I thought back to his initial warning, telling me that the morning shift was worse, I struggled to refrain from thinking about him being wheeled out in a body bag with a gaping hole through his car windshield laced with blood. While I waited and waited, I noticed a similar pattern emerging. Every time I looked away from the sea of grass, the angel statue out in the field appeared to get closer. Was this a mirage? My mind playing tricks on me? I had to put it to the test. With all my concertation I could gather, I ducked under the desk to watch videos. Thinking the longer I stayed away from looking outside, the closer the statue might come. Then something. Maybe I could do something when it's closer to me. Under the desk, a couple of candles and a rusty tin of oil were stacked neatly. I pushed them to the side, keeping the oil close for when the statue came closer. With my laptop ready, I hunkered down. With little concept of time I had, I again watched hours of videos, wrote, surfed the web looking for anything that could help me. Nothing online could I find in relation to the cemetery. It was like history had erased it from existence. Or whatever knowledge was held about this place was trapped in the void with me. Under the desk, I once again heard the rustling out from the fields. The ground trembled every once a while, but I stayed put. When I could not hold out any further, I moved out from the desk. The sun was bright in the sky, beaming with rays. To my surprise, the angel statue had to be no more than 30 feet from the hut. I gazed upon her with wonder. Her outstretched hands appeared welcoming, but the sinister crack down her face made the hairs on my arm stick up. She had an aura to her, one that felt like I was being pulled to her. The closer she came, the more powerful the pull was. I ducked under the desk, back to the internet, and after some time, I emerged. No more than 5 feet from the hut, the angel statue stood firmly in place. I grabbed the oil tin and ventured out towards the statue. The plains were calm. The grass seemed slightly longer than I remember, brushing up almost to my knees. I made my way towards her, keeping focus on her. Closer the pulling felt. It felt comforting, warm. I looked back and the warm feeling went cold. The hut was gone, replaced by the dead grass plains. My heart sank, but what did I have to lose at this point? While time was at a standstill here, so was my life. When I turned back towards the statue, which was now a few inches from me, I nearly leapt out of my skin. We were nose to nose, or where her nose should be. The crack was strewn down her concrete face, disturbing yet inviting. The heat generating from her was radiating. I lightly touched down her arm towards her hand, which was increasingly hotter. Soon, the pain in my finger began to be overwhelming. I looked at my new reconstructed fingers, which were now starting to turn a greenish black. With panic setting in, I poured the oil over her head, and like the last gravestone I did this to, she started to melt. I fell backwards as the pain in my fingers began to sear, waves of agony from the tips of my finger up my arm. I writhed on the floor as she stood over me, blocking out the sun. I bit down on my lips, tasting metallic blood in my mouth as the pain surged through me like electricity. As the oil worked, melting her by the moments, her eclipse was fading as the sun was emerging behind her. Soon she was nothing more than a back-bubbling puddle on the ground. The pain in my body slowly receded. I got to my feet. The wind started to pick up, and the pulling force had completely dropped. I scanned the area, and right behind me was the hut, clear as day. The grand oak tree, the porta-potty, and more importantly, my car. I raced towards the hut, tears streaming down my face. Wiping them away, I noticed a laminated note neatly placed on the table. I shakily picked up the paper which was headed, "Morning Shift Rules." The lump in my throat bobbed within as I read aloud the rules to myself, trembling. Number 1, any visitors to the cemetery must be escorted to their grave. Do not ask any personal questions. Number 2, graves that appear to move must have oil poured over them. Number 3, if the grave digger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and close yourself in till he leaves. Number 4, the night walkers will stalk you from dark areas around the cemetery, but pay no mind to them, but do not destroy any of their flowers. Number 5, lastly, if the grand mausoleum atop the hilltop door is open, try to survive until your shift is over. Rule 5 really put me at ease then. The rules burnt into my head. Over and over I scanned through them. A knock on the door caused me to nearly wet myself. Pressed against the glass was the pimply-faced teen, his braced teeth grinning ear to ear as he pulled on the doorknob. I let him in, wiping the tears from my eyes. The pimply-faced teen spoke. "Geez, man, you look pretty tired." I laughed to myself. The feeling of déjà vu washed over me. Before I could speak, I noticed the landscape around me was back to normal, like I was transported back to reality. I looked at my watch, 7 p.m. The pimply-faced teen threw his bag onto the floor and began texting away. "You're lucky you don't have the morning rules." I manically laughed to myself, making my way to my car. Those similar thoughts of Robert raced back to me. I peeled out down the cemetery path, racing past gravestones while the moon settled high above me. I never thought I'd wish to see nighttime again. When I got home, I called my parents. They were horrified when I talked to them, saying that I had disappeared for over a week and the police were looking for me. Before I could give them an explanation, the call cut out. I tried redialing, but I wasn't able to get a single. I tried different numbers, but to no avail. The waves of drowsiness were really starting to take effect. I struggled to keep my eyes open. Soon my conscience closed like elevator doors, and I was out. I awoke in the early morning hours. No missed calls from my parents, just one call from an unknown number and a voicemail. I cautiously played the voicemail. "Hello, Henry. Glad to have you back with us. Rest assured your parents are okay, but they won't be talking to you anytime soon. You are expected back at the cemetery at 5 a.m. sharp. I assume you have the rules with you. Oh, lastly, Henry, do not try to reach out for help. You are our property now, and we are keeping a very close watch on you." The man's voice cut out sharply. I raced to get dressed, gathering my things. I noticed a shiny silver Cadillac parked across the street with tinted black windows. While I got to my car and made my way to the cemetery, I noticed more and more Cadillacs tucked away. I pulled towards the cemetery road and braced for my second shift, the sun just starting to peek out from past the treetop. As I got myself ready for the morning shift, the dull throb in my hand was coming in waves. It was tender to the touch, like I had an old burn on it that was still healing. My mind raced back to being thrusted into the fire by the golden masked men. I slapped myself back to reality and gathered my things, heading towards the cemetery once more. Again, on my route there, Cadillacs seemed to be tucked away at every corner. I could not shake the feeling that they were watching me. The sun was peeking out over the treetops this morning. It was looking to be a clear day. As I drove along the winding cemetery road, I was getting a better look at the cemetery during the day. It almost looked peaceful. Waiting for me inside the hut was the pimply-faced teen, his head resting down on the table. I pulled up alongside the hut, where he nearly jumped out of his seat. He looked shaken already. We met by the door, exchanged a glance that said we both knew what crazy shit we were in, yet we were still here. "Hey man, you're looking pretty tired. Everything okay?" His voice cracking an octave or two. "Yeah, just been a long few days, that's all," I replied, wiping the sleep from my eyes. "How was your night?" The teen looked around anxiously. "Well, it was weird, to be honest. A gravestone started popping up all around me, so I went to pour the oil over it, you know. When I was out there, the gravestone started to melt, which was cool, but freaked me out a bit. After I did, a few other stones started to appear, so I went out to them as well." "You weren't out longer than 10 minutes, were you?" I cautiously interrupted, my brow raised, feeling like a seasoned vet. "No, I was quick, but on my way back to the hut, I walked by this angelic statue with a crack running down her face." The teen looked defeated in that moment. It struck me as weird, as I never saw a gravestone like her before, so I checked the rules and there it was. It says not to venture out past her, but I didn't even see her when I initially went out. The teen tried to explain, looking around ever so more. "Did anything else happen that night?" I asked, the feeling of dread starting to creep up on me. No, nothing happened, but I started getting this itchy rash on my arm." The teen lifted his sleeve. A scaly red rash about the size of my hand was up his arm. "It's really starting to bug me. I might try to get some cream for it." "Yay, that's pretty strange, man. Be careful of that statue. She's more than she lets out to be, I warned." "All right, will do. Stay safe out there," the teen replied. "I'll try, man, you too," I nodded, watching the teen trail off down the windy dirt road. While I got myself situated, I went over the night rules that I had tucked away in my pocket. Any visitors to the cemetery must escorted to their grave. Do not ask any personal questions. Graves that appear to move must have oil poured over them. If the grave digger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and close yourself in till he leaves. The night walkers will stalk you from dark areas around the cemetery, but pay no mind to them, but do not destroy any of their flowers. Lastly, if the grand mausoleum atop the hilltop door is open, try to survive until your shift is over. Seems simple enough, I thought. I definitely knew the consequences of not following them. While I scanned over the rules, a buzzing from my phone caught my attention. A bank statement, a direct deposit of 2 weeks' pay sent to me. While I hummed over the money that filled my account, the day was only just about to begin. Like usual, the shift started slow. I counted each gravestone I saw, which is vastly easier during the day. I could get a great view of the cemetery during the day, seeing the rolling hills. The scenery was kept very tightly where it was lush with trees, bushes, and various plants. I scanned the horizon, making sure to refer back to the rules after every so often. About midway through the shift, when the effects of boredom were sweeping over me, something caught my attention. Over one of the hills, a shape in the distance began to form. My sight blinded by the sharp rays that day, I struggled to see what looked like a man walking closer to the hut. While he came closer in my view, the older man took on more features. He lumbered as he walked, dragging behind in one hand a rusty old shovel. His gray, straggly beard hung loosely down his face. With a straw hat and blue dusty overalls, his bizarre gait began to set off red flags in my mind. I read over the rules, and there it was, number 3. If the grave digger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and close yourself in till he leaves. Great, now I got to get into a coffin before this guy gets near me. I gathered my things and nervously stepped out into the cemetery, the fresh air filling my lungs. The gravedigger was close, his solid white eyes tracking me down like a predator, stalking prey. His lack of pupils formed a sick, inhuman feeling within me. I began to sprint out into the cemetery, the gravedigger changing course to each direction I went. He picked up his pace while I did the same. I desperately looked for an open grave, hoping I could find one with a casket, something I had never seen within this cemetery before. At a full sprint, he trailed behind me, huffing and grunting like a rabid animal, dragging behind his shovel, which clanged against the gravestones. Sweat was racing down my face now. I could almost feel his breath on my neck. He lumbered over me, the shadow he cast above me nearly blocking out the sun. I dug deep within myself, taking a sharp right down a steep hill. His long, sharp nails clawed into my back. I yelped, but the sudden course of direction threw me off, and apparently him as well. I stepped from the turn, twisted my ankle, which sent me tumbling down the hill. I ragged-dolled all the way down, crashing into an overgrown pile of brush. While I gathered myself, with adrenaline still pumping, the gravedigger carefully tracked his way down the hill. I got to my feet and scanned the area, seeing a large mound of loose dirt piled next to a grave. A light bulb went off in my head, and I beelined to the empty grave. Faced with the dirt pile in front of me, the grave digger wasn't too far away, but gaining ground quick. I looked down into the grave, and 6 feet below the surface, an old wooden coffin sat. I let out breaths of hot air, trying to control my breath as the gravedigger trudged on. I jumped into the grave and lifted up the coffin lid. A feral smell resonated from the coffin, nearly causing me puke up my breakfast. Stinging my nostrils and watering my eyes, I hopped into the coffin, which was filled with loose dirt and debris. I closed the lid, surrounding myself in the foulness, and let myself succumb to the darkness. I prayed this would work as I heard the gravedigger get closer. He stood at the side of the grave, huffing and puffing, letting out a guttural growl every once in a while. While I waited, which felt like an eternity, I felt a sprinkle of dirt hitting the coffin. The gravedigger was burying me alive, feeling the weight of the dirt pile onto the coffin. The wooden coffin creaked after each shovel full that was put on, the grunts of the gravedigger being drowned out. I struggled inside the narrow coffin, hyperventilating as I screamed out. Soon the world went quiet. The shoveling stopped, and all I was left with was the darkness of the suffocating coffin. How long could I be in here? For I wondered as I struggled to hold off a panic attack. I checked my watch. 4 hours to go before my shift ends. The weight of the coffin lid was heavy, not budging an inch. I dreadfully tried to calm myself down. All sense of time was lost, and the claustrophobic feeling never fully went away. Like a true blessing, the minutes before my shift ended winded down. I needed to make a move. I pressed lightly on the coffin lid, where in the past barely moved, now moved with much ease. My back ached with pain from the gravedigger's scratch. I lifted harder this time, creaking open the side, expecting a flood of dirt to come in. When no dirt emerged, I lifted more and the coffin lid came right off. The grave was empty. I stood there puzzled, the full moon above me starting to take shape as nighttime approached. I lifted myself up out of the grave, freezing to see any sights of the gravedigger. When nothing appeared, I made my way hastily back to the hut, passing by the gravedigger's rusty shovel, which was stuck into the dirt pile. On cue, I emerged from the darkness to meet the pimply-faced teen waiting out front of the hut. He looked at me, covered in dirt, and asked what I had been up to. Before I could answer, the ham radio in the hut went off. We looked at each other solemnly as the teen took one last hit of his vape and went to answer the radio. I patted him on the back before getting into my car and headed home. My ankle was sore and my back was caked with dried blood. Once I got home, I showered off the dried blood and dirt and thought long and hard about my life. How long was I going to keep this up before something terrible happens? Something terrible like meeting Robert's fate. I thought hard that night, developing a plan I think may work. With a heavy head from a long day, I slept like a log till early that morning. I woke up that morning with the best sleep I've had in what felt like weeks. I looked at my alarm, letting out a loud stretching yawn. Couple more minutes in bed, then I'll head out, I figured. When the time came, I gathered my things and headed out towards my car. It was going to be cloudy, foggy day according to the forecast. I brought an umbrella with me just in case. Making my way to the cemetery, the usual Cadillacs pathetically tried to remain tucked away. They weren't doing a great job. They could watch me all they want. It didn't bother me. I wasn't planning on sticking around here much longer anyway. With the money I've made, a new change of scenery was just what I needed. Hardest part now was lasting that long till I left. I needed to be smart these next few days. I pulled up along the hut. The pimply-faced teen stared out blankly into the cemetery. I approached him cautiously, even tapping on the glass to get his attention. Nothing. I walked towards the door. He had locked himself in. I banged on the door, jostled the handle, yet he didn't move, frozen like a statue. When I couldn't get a response from him, I warily made my way in front of him through the glass. He sat there wide-eyed, staring out into the cemetery, not blinking. His eyes were red and watery, pupils dilated. I waved and tried to get his attention, but to no avail. When I couldn't get a response, I looked around and noticed a few pebbles around the hut. I picked one up innocently and tossed it at the glass. What I heard was the most hell-raising scream I've heard from a person. The teen shot back to reality with ear-piercing screams like I had shot him. He looked horrified directly at me, his face contorting from his yells. He became hysterical, racing around the tiny hut, knocking its contents over. I tried to help, but he burst through the door and raced down the windy, narrow path out of the cemetery. That left me very unsettled, especially with how good my morning was going already. I got situated in the hut and read over the rules again. Any visitors to the cemetery must escorted to their grave. Do not ask any personal questions. Graves that appear to move must have oil poured over them. If the grave digger appears at any point, you must find an empty coffin and close yourself in till he leaves. The night walkers will stalk you from dark areas around the cemetery, but pay no mind to them, but do not destroy any of their flowers. Lastly, if the grand mausoleum atop the hilltop door is open, try to survive until your shift is over. As the day trudged along, I prayed for no more visits from the grave digger. I don't think I could spend another second inside a coffin. I read over some things online, watched some videos trying to keep calm and cool. I read over the rules again and again, feeling more confident that I would be okay. The cloudy day turned into a full-blown blackout with thick rolling clouds blocking out the sun. The air pressure rose from within the cemetery and the smell of precipitation hung in the air. As the gloominess was settling over the land, I noticed a shape peeking out from behind the oak tree next to the porta potty. A figure stood peering out from behind the tree. It had bright yellow eyes and gray steel-colored skin which looked rugged. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, watching it stand there silently. Watching me from beyond the tree. Had he always been there, I wondered to myself. I looked over the rules when number 4 caught my eye. The night walkers will stalk you from dark areas around the cemetery, but pay no mind to them, but do not destroy any of their flowers. Well, that's great, I thought, looking back towards the tree. But he was gone. I went back to my reading, but my eyes kept drifting up, waiting to see any of these so-called nightwalkers. When I picked my head up for the third time in 5 minutes, I noticed an oddly shaped circular gravestone protruding from the ground, not too far from my car. I could have sworn that was not there originally, as I've never seen a circular tombstone before. I got the oil can ready and headed outside. A cool breeze was blowing as the rolls of gray clouds spilled across the sky. I headed towards the gravestone, which strangely had no markings on it and was cool to the touch. The other gravestones that appeared had always been warm, yet this one was almost icy. I hesitated, thinking this one may not be a random one. I cursed myself for not paying better attention, ultimately deciding to pour the oil over it. While I figured, what could wrong? I was faced with a much different reality. The oil poured over the gravestone, starting to melt it, which gave me some sense of relief. I continued watching when I heard what sounded like a stampede of people running out from within the cemetery. When I looked, the cemetery was quiet, trees and foliage rustling about in the wind. I returned back to the gravestone, which was now almost completely melted. Before I turned and went back inside the hut, a shape from within the oil caught my attention. As it continued melting, a flower began to take shape from inside the cracking gravestone. Confused, I looked down in horror as more of the flower revealed itself. The stampeding started back up again. The flower writhed about from within the oil, death overtaking it. It turned from lush green and white to sickly brown and black, twisting in pain as the oil bubbled around it. The stampede grew louder, the ground vibrating around me. I rushed towards the hut and was faced with the oncoming swarm of nightwalkers. They ran on all fours, mouths hanging agape with bright yellow eyes. Their elongated limbs sprawled apart as they raced for the hut. I went over the rules, not seeing any way to fight them. In a desperate attempt, as they closed in on me, I got in my car and peeled off down the dirt road. Maybe this early retirement was coming sooner rather than later. As I raced along the dirt path, I looked back in my rearview mirror and saw the horde in full force charging towards me. There must have been over 20 of them. Panic filled my body. Dirt crowded the air as they drew closer to me, their gallops shocking the earth, sending waves of vibrations that shook my car. My heart was in my chest. I prayed I'd make it out in one piece. My mind flashed back to Robert's car and what came of him. With the iron gate in front of me, out of the cemetery in sight, I floored it, pushing my car to the limit. Looking behind me one last time, I saw the horde stopped in its path, staring at something. When I turned back around, the woman with long flowing red hair stood smugly in the gate's entrance. I slammed on the brakes, sending screeches resonating through the air, and the car struggled to stay on course. My car spun out of control, flipping over before smashing into the iron perimeter face. I awoke in the mangled car covered in broken glass and the airbag deployed. My ears rang and my nostrils were stung with heavy smoke. I was upside down, trying to get my seatbelt undone. Deep gashes were up along my arms. Blood was trickling down into my eyes, blocking my vision. Before I lost consciousness, the woman in red bent down, looking inside the car, shaking her head disapprovingly before the world went dark. I awoke in my room. It was nighttime. Did I have a dream? I questioned. I went to the door, but I was locked in. This didn't feel like my room. Outside was pitch black, and the window couldn't budge. While being an exact replica of my room, it felt otherworldly. I was covered in bandages and my shoulder ached with pain. My mind raced back to the car crash. It felt so real. The night dragged on. not seeming to move as I stared out the window at some phony movie set. The room smelt like cheap plastic, like the 99-cent version of my real room. It scared me that they knew so much about my life. While I pondered on where my life has taken me till this point, my mind racing back to the blank, hellish faces of the night walkers. A low hum was emitting from the walls around my room. I pressed my ears against the wall, feeling a slight tingle through my body. As I pressed harder into the wall, I caught the faintest sound of talking. My TV across the room flickered on. The loud sound of static made me jump. I turned towards the TV, which lit up the dark room with a light blue fluorescent light as it struggled for a connection. When the TV caught a signal, a woman appeared on the screen. "Well, Henry, you've made it this far. I have to say I am slightly impressed," the woman spoke, taking a long draw from a cigarette. "See, can you hear me?" I questioned. The woman leaned closer to the camera. "Yes, we can, Henry. Let me tell you. You've been a great deal of joy for us, but your time with us is winding down. You have two choices, Henry. We cannot let you leave us knowing all that you know about us. With that, I am going to present with you two options." "Okay, go ahead." That nervous tickle in my throat started to form. "Option number one. I'm sure you are very familiar with what we call the void. You were there for some time, I'd say on Earth hours, approximately a week." My mind flooded with images of the vast dead grass plains that I walked aimlessly. "Yes, I am," I retorted. "Well, good. That is option one. You will be brought there. You will not age and you will not die. I am essentially offering you immortality. Think of it as you are behind the looking glass to reality. Time moves differently when you are there." My mind already going 100 miles a minute, eh? "And option two?" "Option two is you join us, Henry. So far, you have been our longest-lasting security guard. You've seen some pretty marvelous things within our little cemetery. We need someone now to oversee the new cattle that comes in." "Cattle? What do you mean, cattle?" I asked, leaning closer to the screen. We were nearly nose to nose. "We need people like you, Henry, to join us or to feed us. The elders need to feed. That's what makes this world keep on spinning." The woman dragged long on her cigarette till it was a twisty little ash. "I have no clue, lady. Why the hell would I want to join you?" My voice raising. "You don't have to, darling. You have another option." The woman snorted. "Well, fuck that. You just said I'll be cattle for you and whoever the fuck to be fed to," I screamed. The woman rose from her chair and walked off camera, leaving an empty room. I stood in the room huffing and puffing, my head feeling heavy. The lights in the room turned on, blaring me in the eyes. A voice from a speaker somewhere in the room resonated. "Pick, Henry. You have two options," the woman thundered. "I don't know," I cried, falling to the floor weeping. The light getting ever so brighter, blinding me. Thoughts of my family and my old life came rushing back to me. "Pick Henry, or we will decide for you," the woman roared. I tried to make some sense of what was going on. Maybe I could find a way to destroy them. But I would need to be inside with them, I thought to myself. The speaker crashed on. The woman spoke. "We are waiting." Okay, I have decided. I will join you, whatever the hell you is." I bawled. "Very good, Henry. Wait for further instruction and someone will be with you shortly. I suggest getting situated in your new room," the speaker hummed off. I crashed onto the bed, tears racing down my face while my mind raced. I couldn't go back to the void. I'd lose my mind in there. Maybe there is some way I can figure more of this out, but I need to be in this reality to do it. As I laid on my bed while began to overtake me, I slept soundly till being woken by the sounds of birds chirping. I looked out from my window, seeing the bright rays of sunlight peeking out from the horizon. Except I wasn't looking out of my apartment window. I was looking out into the cemetery where graves stood scattered amongst the fields of brush and foliage. I stumbled backwards in a panic, screaming out to the woman's voice, hoping she'd answer me. Why? Why am I back here? What's going on? I wailed. The room went bright white again, blinding my eyes, searing into them. As I crumbled to the floor, I tried to fight against the searing white-hot light. Then, nothing. Like an instant flash, I opened my eyes and was met by the glaring metal of my wrecked car. I tried to stand up, but my body ached in pain. Blood was racing down my forehead. My car laid in a mangled, totaled mess. I stumbled to my feet, using the car to help me up. Glass cracked as I struggled to get my footing. The sun was high in the sky that day, yet a neutral, comfortable temperature laid about. I looked around as the panic and dread set in deep within my stomach. An empty field lay before me with soft, overgrown yellowish grass. I stepped forward, nearly falling over as my legs struggled to keep balance. I turned around to grab my car and it was gone. Soft, dead grass lay in its place. My mind went heavy as the tears bubbled in my eyes. I walked on that day aimlessly, walking for what felt like days as the sun never moved. I eventually stumbled upon a lowly hut, sitting far out in the distance. My mind felt like mush as I pushed ahead. After some time, I reached the all-so-familiar hut. I let myself in, and on the desk sat a tiny cube-screen TV. Curious, I switched it on, and it played what looked like a live feed from a camera. The camera showed nighttime footage facing the hut, yet it wasn't me in the hut. I knew who was sitting there. It was a pimply-faced teen who looked terrified as he stared out into the darkness of the cemetery. I watched on indefinitely, watching his every move. I tried messing with the other buttons, which were line 10 long of various different colors. I pressed the yellow button and stared on. Clang! Something hit the glass on the hut on the live feed. The teen jolted his head up, looking around anxiously. What the hell, I thought. I pressed the yellow button again. Another clang as a tiny pebble crashed into the glass. The teen dove under the table, rummaging for something. I pressed the button again and again, getting a little thrill each time. Clang, clang, clang. More and more pebbles hit the glass. The teen let out a pathetic little scream. He struggled under the desk, sitting there in the darkness. Smart, I thought. I leaned back in my chair, gazing upon the power that I controlled before me. I let the teen get comfortable, thinking he beat it this time. That's when I pressed the yellow, blue, red, and green button all at once. While I sat there comfortably chuckling to myself, the horrors of the cemetery pounced upon the teen, his terror-filled screams radiating through the tiny TV speaker. I gazed upon his death and saw the woman with red hair appear from the darkness. She looked directly at the camera from a distance, gave a wink, and walked off to retrieve his body. The sun was high that day, as it was each day going forward. Hard to tell what a day is in this place, since it was never nighttime. During my time here, I've watched countless of new security guards come in. It gets pretty fun trying to come up with new ways to fuck with them, to scare them, to see if they can keep up with all the rules. Death after death, they came and went. I'm following one girl right now. She's getting pretty far ahead in this little game. She's almost made it to where I made it last time. I hate to say it, but I feel kind of proud of her.